In the spring of 1940, with the German seizure of Denmark and Norway, the blitz that swept from the Rhine through France to the Bay of Biscay, and the crippled retreat of the British Army from Dunkirk, America began to grow uneasy.
Though the German Wehrmacht had ripped its way across the face of a continent, the terrible implications of its conquests were slow to reach across the seas.
The American people believed that distance provided adequate insulation between us and any conflict in Europe or Asia. Comparatively few understood the direct relationship between American prosperity and physical safety on the one hand, and on the other, the existence of a free world beyond our shores.
Bombs were falling and people by the thousands were dying in Europe. But this was the United States, and it was spring. So why worry? But our dreams of peaceful isolation gradually began to fade. As the Nazis swept across Europe and England fought for her life, we finally became concerned enough about the state of our armed forces for Congress to vote the first peacetime draft in American history, over heavy pressure from a large block of voters. The attention of every man and woman in the United States was focused on Washington on that eventful October 29th in 1940.
The President of the United States.
Dr. Dykstra, ladies and gentlemen, members of your government are gathered here in this federal building in Washington to witness the drawing of numbers as provided for in the Selective Service Act of 1940. This is a most solemn ceremony. It is accompanied by no fanfare, no blowing of bugles, or beating of drums, and there should be none. The young men of America today have thought this thing through. They have not been stimulated by or misled by militarist propaganda. They fully understand the necessity for national defense and are ready, as all citizens of our country must be, to play their part in it. They know that in the present world, the survival of liberty and justice is dependent on strength to defend against attack. To the young men themselves, I should like to speak as Commander-in-Chief of the United States Army. You will be members of an army which first came together to achieve independence and to establish certain fundamental rights for all men. Ever since that first muster, our democratic army has existed for one purpose only: the defense of our freedom.
The machinery of the draft was set in motion by Henry L. Stimson.
The first number drawn by the Secretary of War is serial number 158.
By the summer of 1941, the Army of the United States, composed of regulars, guardsmen, and citizen soldiers, numbered 1,500,000. No larger peacetime force had ever been mustered by this country. It was, nevertheless, only a temporary compromise with international fact.
All men, attention. Get your forms at this platform. Proceed to the next station and pick up your tags. Place the tags around your neck. Then go to the next room where the headings for all your forms will be typed out for you. No smoking, please.
Slowly and intricately, the United States Army began to expand. All over the nation, America's young men were giving up their places in civilian society to answer their country's call to arms. During that first year, following the passage of the Selective Service Act, almost 1 million men were inducted into the armed forces after thorough mental and physical examinations. America's new army was a representative crosscut of the young male population, drawn from all trades and professions, and including specialists from every field. To most of America's new soldiers, military life presented certain problems.
Rear, point. Rear, point. What? Halt. Left shoulder, turn. Forward, turn. Inspection, turn. Order. Right, order. Command order. Close the bolt. Turn.
Hey, Mac, what time do we get up in the morning?
Don't worry, I'll get you up.
The U.S. now had a peacetime army numerically stronger than at any time in its history, but it had definite limitations as an offensive weapon.
The 1 million men who had come into the Army through the National Guard and Selective Service could not be required to serve anywhere outside the Western Hemisphere, or for more than 12 months at home.
Converting its citizen soldiers into a powerful fighting force was no small task, the Army soon discovered. But when necessary, the American male can adapt himself to any situation. The metamorphosis from citizen into soldier was usually completed successfully. In August 1941, with the Germans pushing across Russia, the United States faced a new problem. Its first citizen soldiers, now thoroughly trained, would soon be eligible to leave the Army at the end of their year's service. It was evident to many Americans that the existing selective service law must be amended.
The attack at Pearl Harbor was less than 4 months away when, by a 1-vote margin in the House of Representatives, the Congress passed the Selective Service Extension Act, extending the term of service.
The job of making soldiers out of unmilitary civilians naturally fell to the experienced non-commissioned officers of the regular Army.
Hi, Duffy.
How'd it go, Murph?
How did it go? 20 years in this man's army, and I've never seen the likes of what they're sending us for soldiers these days. All thumbs and 2 left feet. Oh, well. We'll knock the rough edges off them. Some of the guys catch on pretty quick, considering that they didn't know their right arm from third base when they first got here. Most of them are even learning to move a little faster and take care of themselves in tight spots. The obstacle course is a big help in teaching a man how to handle himself at all times, but that's only a part of the job. What they really need is to get the feel of how it's going to be when they're moving up and the enemy is looking down their throats. Some of these guys are going to faint when they see a real tank. What makes it tough is that we can't give them the equipment they're going to be using. You don't hug the ground very close when you know the other guy's shooting at you with a wooden gun.
Although the job had often seemed hopeless to the men of the regular Army, they soon began to see the practical results of their work with the recruits. And the Army itself earned unexpected dividends from its early training program.
It brought to the specific attention of senior officers certain of the younger men who were prepared to carry out the most difficult assignments in staff and command. And it developed among responsible leaders skill in the handling of large forces in the field.
During the autumn of 1941, large-scale maneuvers were held in several parts of the U.S. to ready the new soldiers for problems similar to those they would face in combat. Most extensive of these maneuvers was the simulated war exercise in Louisiana, where some 350,000 officers and men split into rival armies and staged a mock battle.
The beneficial results of that great maneuver were incalculable. It accustomed the troops to mass teamwork. It speeded up the process of eliminating the unfit.
As much real equipment was used as the Army had available at the time, and the men learned how to handle it well. For many of the men, this was the best training yet on how to operate as a group. The Army was pleased with the seriousness with which the soldiers took the maneuvers. But the infantry was not the only branch to receive a workout.
We conducted in Louisiana an extensive test of the usefulness of the Cub plane for liaison and observation purposes. Its worth was demonstrated so conclusively that later in the War Department, I was able to argue successfully for its inclusion in the normal equipment of every division. These planes enabled our heavy and long-range artillery to gain an accuracy and quickness of adjustment previously restricted to the light guns within eye-shot of the target. And field commanders could get a grasp of the tactical situation, terrain, avenues of movement, concentrations of troops and artillery.
Much of the motorized equipment, which was to be such a factor throughout the war in Europe, received its first real test in those last months of peace in 1941. In each case, its capabilities and its weaknesses as well were fully explored and suggestions for possible improvements noted.
Like a vast laboratory experiment, the maneuvers would prove the worth of ideas, men, weapons, and equipment.
The maneuvers provided the Army, too, with its first opportunities to study the problems of supply involved in servicing large, fast-moving forces.
No comparable peacetime attempt had ever been made by Americans in the road movement of food, fuel, and ammunition from railhead and depot to a constantly shifting front line. Advanced planning, consequently, was thorough and intensive. As is always the case, it paid off. Practical experience was gained in large-scale field supply of troops. The essential effectiveness of supply, General McNair told the assembled staffs in a critique of the operations, was an outstanding feature of the maneuvers.
And finally, Army motor transport was subjected to a rigorous trial under demanding conditions.
The efficiency of American trucks in the movement of troops and supply, demonstrated so magnificently 3 years later in the race across France, was forecast on the roads of Louisiana in September 1941.
On the whole, the Army was pleased with the overall conduct of the maneuvers, with the performance of the great percentage of officers and men. The Army of the United States was fast approaching fighting form.
The maneuvers provided me with lessons and experience that I appreciated more and more as subsequent months rolled by.
During those same autumn months in 1941, football was, as usual, one of the nation's principal interests. Hundreds of thousands of Americans jammed the stadiums to watch the pros play, each Sunday afternoon from late September until early in December. One Sunday, late in the season, a game of a different sort was being played in the Pacific, news of which was soon to blot out the football scores. In the Hawaiian Islands, It was a sunny, lazy Sunday morning, December 7th, 1941.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. And this morning, the Japanese attacked Midway Island. Japan has therefore undertaken a surprise offensive extending throughout the Pacific area. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. The people of the United States have already formed their opinions and well understand the implications to the very life and safety of our nation. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
In every town and village in the country, Americans closed ranks behind their commander-in-chief. The United States was at war, and the people of the United States were ready for the challenge.
At the outset, none of us could foresee the end of the struggle. Few of us saw eye to eye on what was demanded of us as individuals and as a nation. But each began step by step to learn and to perform his allotted task.
Be sure to be with us for the next thrilling episode of Crusade in Europe, showing America Goes to War. This is a syndicated feature of the American Broadcasting Company. This is a syndicated feature of the American Broadcasting Company.